Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai, Bashem Rakakwadasha, but honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, teachings of truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath Listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to read through an article, real short, in regards to some of the things that transpire in the so-called Middle East, right, in the land. Excuse me. And it says, the title of the article, it says settlers uproot 1,000 olive trees in Tormuz Aya near Ramallah. And so this is something that the how do you call it? The so-called people of the land are basically they're doing. And I wanted to read this, because it's very interesting because the earth really is in a state of like mourning, because if they really were the people of the land, I'll say it like this: if those people were truly the people of the land, the people, the Lord's chosen people, and if they were in the land, they would be essentially, there would be peace on earth, right? There wouldn't be any wars, right? And this is just an aspect of what's going on in the land as well, right? You're really supposed to be, showing the other nations, things to do and things what not to do, teaching them what is holy and showing them what is profane, right? So as a matter of fact, I'll start with that. I'll read that first, and then I'll read the article, because a priest is important, because a priest basically is supposed to show the people, first and foremost with our people, the priest is supposed to teach the law of what's actually important, what's profane and what's holy, what's considered acceptable and what's considered unacceptable. So it says here, this is Isaiah, just to back up this quick point I wanted to just add, Isaiah chapter 2, I'll start at verse 1 and I'll read down to 4. And it says, the word of Isaiah, the son of Amos, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it said, it would come to pass in that last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and the nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall say, go, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and the house of his power, the power of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. From out of Zion shall come forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. So they're not going to be in a mindset of gathering weapons. They're not going to be in a mindset of, farming, trying to stock up on nuclear weapons, because there's no need for that in those days, and there's no need for that in the kingdom, right? They don't need these things, these weapons of mass destruction, these rockets, these ICBMs, and so on and so forth. So that one there is a cut that shows that the people in the land are not the real people, because what are the nations doing right now? Just as Yahushua described in Matthew the 24th chapter, where we're hearing, as it says, wars and rumors of wars, right? We're seeing the love of many waxing cold, right? We're seeing all those different things. And pursuant to Joel, the 3rd chapter, you're seeing the complete opposite. And the opposite states, the nations are going to beat their plowshares into swords. So the nations are basically being galvanized into a mindset of war. They're not in a mindset of trying to invest in farming tools. That's not their mindset right now, because there's a controversy, because those people in the land are not truly the real people. And when you talk to them, you know what I'm saying? Their scattering is only this is limited to Europe. It's not actually pursuant to the prophecy where we will be scattered, from the four ends of the earth, from one end to the other, and we shall serve the other gods, and essentially we will discontinue from our heritage, right? So there's a lot of plot holes, right? There's a great inquisition that's going on amongst what's going surrounding these people of the land, right? Because now they're trying to become a thorn in the side of the whole of the whole world at this point. You know, it's becoming a thorn in the side of these EU nations. It's becoming a thorn in the side of the surrounding nations. Lebanon is very known for its trees. You know what I'm saying? All the other surrounding nations, they want to go in, and covet their their resources, right? They want to establish what they call as their greater Israel project. They just want to get it by their own means, but it doesn't, that's not, that promise is not for them, right? It's only for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So as a matter of fact, let me go here 1 second. One second. This is Proverbs, just a real quick precept. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 21. And it says, an inheritance may be gotten hastily at the beginning, but at the end thereof it shall not be blessed, right? So the end thereof is there's no blessing falling upon these people that's in the land right now, because they don't actually even exemplify the law, and they don't exemplify any sort of uprightness. They don't, they're not the people of the Lord, right? So okay, let me go back to Isaiah 2, then I'll go to the article real quick, Salak. Let me just finish verse 4. And it says, they shall judge among the nations and rebuke many people, and shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. The nation shall not rise up sword against any nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So in the kingdom, of heaven, the other nations are not gonna have a need for swords and all these different weaponry and all this kind of stuff. They're gonna go back into a mindset of agriculture, utilizing the resources that's on the land rather than destroying it, as you're gonna see in this lesson here. So the article is quite, not very long. I just wanted to bring this up for edification, because this is how they treat the land, just to show more receipts of, these people are not who they say they are, right? So it says here is really, okay, they're uprooting a bunch of olive trees, right? So here it says, and I want to include a picture of an olive tree as well, you know, because when you the olives are basically used for, what's it called, to make olive oil, right? So this is a fruit that's very essential, and the so-called Palestinians, they were essentially using the meat, using the fruit of the land to be able to essentially sustain themselves, right? It is a very fruitful, land, but ever since these heathens have been in there, it's they've been, this is the way they treat the land. They don't treat the land according to the ways of the Lord, right? So it says here, Israeli settlers uprooted and vandalized at least 1,000 olive trees in the towns of Termus, Aya, northeast of Ramallah, according to local officials. It says a member of the town's council, it says Abdullah Awad, it says settlers entered the agricultural plain at dawn, accompanied by a bulldozer from a nearby Shiloh settlement, bulldozing the farmland and uprooting trees across the area around 50, it says dunhams, which is about 10 acres, belonging to local families. So they had you know families that were utilizing these different trees right? And it says here, well, it said in the area that faced intensifying settlement campaign over the past 3 years, including repeated attacks on farmland and restrictions preventing farmers from accessing their land. It says he added approximately 25,000 olive trees have been uprooted in the area during the period without formal military orders and land confiscations, right? And it says here, continuing on, the plain, which spans about 6,000 dunhams, so that works out to be, that looks like about, one second. Let's say maybe 12, maybe about 120 acres, right? If my math is correct. It says is considered one of the town's most important agricultural areas and is subjected to near daily attacks and livelihood. So essentially, they're doing this to basically get at the people of Palestine, right? Yes, they're not the people of the land either. Of course, you do have our people sprinkled amongst, the other nations, right? So they will also come looking like the other nations. But, Jerusalem, essentially has been trodden down, as the scriptures say, trodden down by the Gentiles, right? And this is what's going on. They've been, back then, the Romans rolled in 70 AD, right? Under the Emperor Vespasian. And, a lot of our people fled into the interiors of Africa, right? So, and then eventually you started having a lot of so-called like Arabs come in around the 700 AD, so on and so forth, right? And basically, they've been, eventually, they were know what we know as Palestinians, right? Because this world has a lot of sympathy for, the Palestine and so on and so forth, but they're not the people of the land either, right? And eventually, through fulfilling another prophecy, you would have, some Idumeans, some Edomites come in, and they would appoint that land unto themselves, right? So they fulfill another prophecy, right, where they would appoint the land for themselves, pursuant to Ezekiel 36, right? And so this is way, you see, this is the rundown of the situation of what's going on in the land, right? So going into the aspect of pretty much the trees, there's a way to treat the land. Let's see. So this is Deuteronomy 20, verse 19. And it says, when thou shalt besiege a city a long time, and making war against it to take it, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof by forcing an axe against them. For thou mayest eat of them, and thou shalt not cut them down. For the tree of the field is man's life, to employ them in the siege. It says, only the trees which thou knowest that may be not trees for meat, right? And it says, thou shalt destroy and cut them down, and thou shalt build bulwarks against the city, and maketh war with thee until it be subdued, right? So sometimes when you see meat is normally referring to like grains, right? So let me see if I just get it in another translation, right? Because when you say like meat, like we understand meat to be like, steak and chicken and stuff like that. That's not necessarily what it always means when it says meat. Let me see if I can get this in. Let's go to the Amplified. Okay, so in the Amplified in Deuteronomy 20, it says, only the trees which you know that are not fruit trees shall you destroy and cut down, so you may build bulwarks against it, siege works against the city in the making war with you until it falls. So this is in regards to matters of war. if a tree has, fruit, like in the verse above, it says fruit bearing trees, right? So olive is also a fruit because olives, those were important. That's an important resource. In the ancient times, it was used, it's crushed to make oil. It was also used to make soap, right? It has a lot of, benefits, right? So for you to do that, it means that you're not utilizing the resources the Lord Yahweh Bashim Hashai, provided on the land, right? Showing that those people of the land are not the real people, because they don't have it in their mind frame of how to utilize the resources properly. So here it is. Think about it like this. They want to capitalize and get other portions, of the land, get portions and be a burdensome, to these other nations, these surrounding nations like Lebanon and Syria and Iran and so on and so forth. They want to get all these other portions, of, the land, right? And they don't even know the essentially the benefits, the resources that are on that land, right? So, as a matter of fact, Psalms 50, let's see, Psalms 50, verse 16, and it says, "But unto the wicked, the Most High Yahweh Bashim Shai saith, What hast thou do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant into thy mouth, seeing thou, hatest instruction and casteth my words behind thee." Right. So this is the mindset of Esau. You know, this is the mindset of those people in the land. They don't actually reverence anything that's actually within the Lord's instructions. The Lord's instructions are higher than our instructions, right? So they destroy the land. They just covet fields, and they're taking it by violence, as it says in Micah. They just want more, right? And then they're just people of war, right? They don't actually care about actually forwarding any sort of examples of righteousness, right? Because if you really were, that's the kind of tone you want to set, for the other nations, right? They just want to, mooch off these other nations, primarily, America, and Americans are getting fed up by that. They're getting fed up by that because they're realizing there is more attention being thrown at the state of Israel as opposed to taking care of the welfare of Americans, right? A lot of the politicians, they have taken resources, probably most likely from like APAC and so on and so forth, right? And they push forth the agenda for the Ish people. They don't care about you Americans. They don't care, right? So, I wanted to read that. I also wanted to just get this real quick. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's in Exodus, just to show the example of what what's it called, the olive trees, were used for, like, just because you use it for oil, right? So I wanted to just read this. One second, let me just look for it. So this is Exodus 30, verse 22, and the AMP, and it says, "And moreover, the Lord Yahweh said to Moses, Take for yourself best spices, 500 shekels of liquid myrrh, half as much, and 250 of sweet scented cinnamon, and 250 of fragrant cane, and 500 shekels of cinnamon blossom, according to the sanctuary shekel, and a hin of olive oil. And you shall make of these a holy anointing oil, a perfume mixture, a work of a perfumer, and it shall be a sacred anointing oil. And you shall anoint the tent of the meeting," so the tabernacle, the ark of the testimony, the bread, the table for the bread and all its utensils, and the lampstand and the utensils, and the altar of incense, and the altar for the burnt offering, which with all its utensils, and the basin for cleansing its base, and you shall consecrate them, and that they may be most holy. Whatever touches them must be holy, so it's set apart for the Most High Yahweh Bashem El Shai. And you shall anoint Aaron and his sons and consecrate them, and they may serve as priests to me. So they were essentially, you use that to anoint the vessels, the tabernacle, and the priests were essentially consecrated, just to show you the importance of what the oil from the olives were actually used for. It wasn't just there for show, right? It wasn't there just to be uprooted, right? So this is the type of people, they don't actually consider the usage of these different things. They're just basically they're just destroyers, right? There's nothing sacred about them. There's nothing consecrated about them, right? So I just wanted to read that, just to show, they don't. It's not just about the how they treat the people. It's also how they treat the land, and it's essentially it's become a burdensome to the rest of the other nations. The scriptures say, thou art greatly despised, and then people are realizing that. I remember I had a conversation with a Lebanese woman like earlier last month, and and she had some very, very strong words about that state. She doesn't like them. A lot of people don't like them, right? So anyways, I just thought I would just read this, just for edification, you know but Lord's will, this lesson was just quick, edifying, straight to the point. But Lord's will, is edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.